everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Get Wealth podcast. Super excited for this episode today. I have Dan Havercost on the show, owner of Front Range Land. Is it Front Range Land or
Yeah,
Frontage?
correct.
Okay, awesome. So from what I can tell, you're kind of an expert in doing land deals and really successful real estate entrepreneur in general. So I'm excited to kind of see inside your mind and see what your business looks like and how you run it, and maybe you can provide some insights to the audience about how they might be able to do that themselves. Thanks for coming on the show, and I'm looking forward to talking to you.
Yeah, Brendan, thanks for having me. It's always fun talking real estate.
Cool. So I always like to start. How did you get into it? Where did it all begin? How did you know this was something you even wanted to do?
Sure. So I grew up in Ohio, originally rural Ohio. I joke that I grew up in a cornfield, but it's not really a joke. I pretty much grew up in a cornfield in rural Ohio. And everyone in my family, I had a bunch of older siblings, older cousins, worked very blue collar jobs, didn't make a lot of money, were pretty much slaves to their jobs. And I saw that from a young age. And so I started working pretty early because I didn't want college debt. I saw all of them accrue a lot of college debt. And so in high school, last couple of years, junior and senior year, I was running somebody else's business. I was managing his rentals and managing a farm while he was out of the country most of the year. And then in college, worked a couple miscellaneous jobs the first couple of years on the side of school. And then the last 2 years, I ran part of a landscaping company for someone else while going to school full time. And I remember around 20 years old, I was pretty frustrated. I mean, I was working 45-ish plus hours a week plus school full time, which was a lot. And I didn't have a lot of fun in college, whereas most people do. And so anyways, I thought, well, this has sucked, but how do I take this experience to the real world as I finish school, start some sort of business, do some sort of investing so that I can put myself ahead. And started reading different books, podcasts. I found Bigger Pockets and read about equities and investing and that side of things. And like everyone else, it was Rich Dad, Poor Dad that really was the light bulb moment. I read that and I said, real estate it is. So I bought a duplex while I was still in college as a house hack. I was 21. And then shortly after, finished school, decided I didn't want to stay in Ohio. So I drove out here to Colorado, bought another house hack. And around that time, I realized the low and no money down stuff is applicable maybe to starting a business, an active business, but it is not applicable to investing. Investing is a cash intensive venture, something you do once you have money. And so long story, but met a guy at the local real estate group out here in Colorado Springs, and he had been doing land and development for the last 40 plus years. And I would drive an hour south every weekend to Pueblo, Colorado to work with him, learn from him, help him in his business. And that's what I did. I did that for years and eventually just started participating with him, going and sourcing the land deals for his new builds, and then eventually participating along with him in the new builds. And that's ultimately where Front Range Land came from. So that's my active day-to-day business, which is all land and development. And then that feeds the continual accrual of rental properties.
Whoa, that's crazy. So, okay, so your first investment was like a house hack. That was the very first deal kind of you did.
Yep, Parma, Ohio.
You still have that one?
Yep, sure do.
Okay, and are you still interested in owning real estate and being a landlord,
Oh,
or?
definitely. It's just my whole thought process around that has changed, right? When you discover Bigger Pockets, right, and everything they teach, they talk about making a business out of investing, really. And I mean, it is either way, it is a business. But what I mean is, going and finding distressed property and doing maybe
Yeah,
an active business where you can
right.
scale your income dramatically and then just buy and or build and keep nice rentals. I don't want to touch C real estate. I don't really want to do any more big rehabs. I'm planning to just build and keep and or buy really prime real estate going forward. So that's the big shift, is that I find you can make a lot more progress just scaling your income, because with an active business in the right niches, you can expand by an order of magnitude over and over again pretty quickly. So
yeah, and I'm sorry, I think the Wi-Fi or something cut out there for the first part of that. But basically, if I understand correctly, you were saying Bigger Pockets teaches you how to make, the real estate investing into like an active income business, where your perspective is more of you want to have a business that generates a lot of income, and then you can, just plug that into the real estate.
Exactly. Yes, exactly.
Okay. Yeah, that seems like the way to scale, the best way to do it. I mean, kind of getting started in investing or personal finance and stuff, you kind of go down the rabbit hole of like, put this amount of money away for 40 years and you'll retire a millionaire. And to me, that's just like, I don't even know how someone can make that process. You want to wait 40 years to be able to find like $1 million is going to be like 100 grand in 40 years.
I know. Yeah.
Yeah. The only real way to do it is to increase your income. I mean, if there's something you can control rather than how much of what you make you put away is how much you make. You just learn a skill or start a business, then 10% of that, sure, yeah, then go invest 10% of that. You're gonna get there a lot quicker than the traditional way.
Sure.
Severely outdated. But land development in general, I think, is overlooked. It almost seems like there's a bridge between there's a gap between people that are like interested in investing in real estate. You think of a house, you think of managing a rental property or whatever it is, but developing almost goes more towards construction, and people I think get a little bit more scared that like it requires you to go learn how to build a house or something. Is that the case? Like what really does it take to get into land development?
Yeah, so you're right. There is a gap between construction and investors where for some reason people in our world often think that new builds are risky, which to me is hilarious because it's far, far, far simpler than trying to do a flip or a rehab. A new build, it's the same thing every time. The only difference is the soil or the topography. Whereas with a flip, a rehab, you don't know what's under the floors, what's under the walls, you don't know what you don't know. Whereas it's much, much, much simpler building a box over and over and over again. Yeah, I would say it's more a matter of knowing how to screen people and put the right people in place. Because, it's funny. I was talking to a friend of mine last night who builds, and he's a little more involved in his builds. He's got in-house construction crews and everything. And he asked me about the R factor on the insulation. I go, I don't know. I don't want to know. That's not what I do. I just put the people in place. And so if you can screen and properly incentivize a contractor, the right contractor, they handle the minutia and the technicality. And so it's more a matter of being able to put the right people in place along with the capital and the correct land.
Got it. So explain to me how that works. So you're going to go, you find a piece of land, right? You find, I'm assuming, a discounted piece of land in an area that is a hot market for people buying new builds. And then you find a contractor, you build a house, and then ideally there's a spread at the end where you make a certain amount. Can you kind of break down each step? Are you going on the market for the land? How do you find a contractor? And then what kind of return are you looking for?
Sure. Okay. So first and foremost, we need to make a distinction here. Okay. I don't touch raw land. And I see this misused all the time, that word. People see a piece of land and they go, vacant raw land. It might be, but I go after infill. And what I mean by infill, you're in a subdivision or a built out city and you have 10 houses on a street, and then there's 3 pieces of dirt between the houses, right? 3 unbuilt, not built, lots that have never been built on. And the implication in the word infill is that the entitlements are done, the streets and utilities are there. For all intents and purposes, the land is shovel ready, meaning once you have your permit, you can start building. You don't have to do any horizontal work. And so that is very, very, very different than trying to go out and take raw land and get it to that point that you can build. That's a whole nother business in and of itself. That is not what I do. I have plenty of friends that do it. It's just another niche. So important distinction to start off there. That is far more complicated. and it just takes longer. So there is more risk of the market changing in the interim when you're not dealing with that sort of land, with infill land. So I go out, and Front Range Land is based on a giant marketing funnel direct to seller. And so via mail and cold calling, we get land deals for 30 to 50 cents on the dollar all over the country. I only build here locally in Colorado, but the other stuff we just flip. Anyways, so I get a lot that is shovel ready, under contract, somewhere in that range, call it 50 cents on the dollar. And from there, plans are really, really simple. But again, this varies dramatically by market. In the market I'm in, I just paid a couple invoices this morning. I spend about $1,000 for the engineering of the foundation and soils report. And then I pay about $600 for the above ground plans, the actual house. And then the trusses are done by the truss company, because you need an engineer for that as well, but that's just part of the package. And I think I said, what, $600 or $700 for the plans. So we're talking less than $2,000 to get the plans done. And then I pay $450 for a survey. Now, anybody who's built in a major metro is probably in disbelief, because that's obscenely cheap, right? So this is a big conversation, but the market you're in matters a lot. Because if you try and do this in downtown Denver, it's a very, very different story. And then again, emphasizing the point that the land is horizontally developed, it takes all of 2 weeks to get a permit once you have your plans and engineering done. And a couple, gosh, I forget the permit fees, but it's about $1,000. All right. So you buy your land, you get your plans, you get your permit. And at the same time, of course, you want to have found a contractor. And I like to find someone that has been building in that market for a long time, so they know that market specifically. Somebody ideally who one of my friends has used, so they can come referred by someone I know and trust. And then somebody who is building the same sort of product that I want to build. You know, if all they build is multifamily, I'm probably not going to call them to do a couple spec homes, just single family homes. And one other thing that's a little harder to determine, is more a matter of interviewing them and ideally getting a referral from someone you trust, is don't work with contractors that are broke. If they need to be paid immediately, if they can't float anything, that's a problem. I don't want to work with a contractor that's broke. So those are a couple things I do to screen contractors. But at the end of the day, the best ones I've found have always been referred by someone or multiple people I know and trust. Then from there, you have to set up some sort of arrangement with them, and ideally make sure they're incentivized, to be honest, to be as efficient and quick as possible. And so, having done this a couple different ways, I would encourage you to set this up where it's a matter of at least some portion of profit split, because then they're more incentivized. So I'm switching. I've got 2 new builds closing this month. Switching contractors. That guy's kind of gotten old and fat, metaphorically speaking, as in lazy and slow. And so with the new contractor, the new builder I'm working with, we're just going to put everything in at cost and split the profit. And that way our incentives are aligned. And then it's mostly passive for me. Once the land is purchased, I've paid for the plans, and we've gotten the loan set up, and it's just a matter of dispersing draws. So I would recommend doing it that way, because again, going back to the beginning of our conversation, I am not looking to be the one doing the day-to-day or actually building the home. I just want to be the orchestrator, right? My time is valuable. So make sure your incentives are aligned and they are actually incentivized to build quickly, cheaply, and efficiently. And then from there, of course, you need a lender. I'm assuming you probably don't have the cash for the whole thing. And so a lot of local hard money lenders will finance the whole construction if you have the land bought outright. So I use a lender out of Denver. I've been using him for years. Just put up the land and he does the entire vertical as far as financing. Now, part of that is there's a spread. If you don't have a spread, if your build cost is close to the appraised value, the retail value, that's not going to work. A lot of local, more traditional small banks are going to want land plus 15 or 20% down. They're slow, they're antiquated. I hate working with them. It's not worth saving a couple $1,000s, so I do not use them personally. And so to that end, you should have gotten a full breakdown from whatever contractor you chose of the cost to put up that building, whichever you chose. I'm trying to juggle each and every step, but it's not one thing at a time. It's a lot of this is being done simultaneously.
Got
right?
it.
And then from there, assuming you set things up correctly, it's very simple. Your contractor goes and actually builds it. You disperse the draws as he moves through it, pay your interest payments. And depending on whether this is just something you want to keep or sell, if it's something you want to sell, I recommend putting it on the market once it's framed in. Granted, we're getting into such a low inventory environment. Again, it might be worth marketing even earlier. That's a conversation for another day, but having these things pre-sold is nice. So usually I start marketing them, have them listed on the MLS before we're completely done. And then, I have one closing next Friday where we sold that 2 months ago, right? And so it's not done. I think we'll get the CO today, the certificate of occupancy. For anyone who doesn't know what that means your home is finally done and livable. So anyways, ideally start marketing it before complete, get it pre-sold, and then right when it's finished, you can ideally close to sell it to your end buyer. Now margins, it's been all over the board, and I'll tell you because the reason for that is that the crazy commodity fluctuations we saw during the pandemic definitely ate into our margin a couple of times where I had pre-sold it and then lumber went crazy, concrete, windows. But lumber has come back down. Prices have stayed high. We've gotten windows are still high, concrete's still higher. Some of the subs are higher, but with this new builder I have, he is ruthlessly efficient. And so to answer your question simply, over the years, it's been somewhere between 40 and 80, a few a little better, a few a little worse in profit, but looking to increase that even further with the new builder I have. He is exceptional on the vertical side of things. And then I've really gotten good at getting the soft cost down and the land cheaply. And so combining our efforts, we should be able to get even more out of it going forward because prices are still high, but a lot of commodities have come back down. Not all.
Wow.
So.
That's awesome. And I have a lot of questions, but just a few off the top of my head from that. So you're building in Colorado, right? Pueblo,
Mm-hmm.
Colorado. Okay. And what do they sell for? What is the average sale price for that?
So in Pueblo West,
Oh.
home for years, and it had been selling. When I moved here 5 years ago, that would sell in the mid to upper 200s. I sold one last year at 398, and then this year prices have come back down, so that sort of product will sell 370, 380 ish. But everything's so in flux. I mean, prices are already getting pushed back up, so we'll see where we're at in another few months.
Yeah. And what would you say that business model is really difficult in a market where houses like, maybe like on the East Coast or something, or houses that'll sell for like in the 150,000? Are all the prices just lower, or does the end price change a whole lot of what the margins are?
Interesting. When you say East Coast, I immediately thought you were going to say expensive, as in million plus. Do you mean like the Midwest?
Yeah, no, like Midwest. Yeah, sorry, like Indiana or like Ohio or something like that.
I've never built there. A lot of those metros are very built out, and there's not as much infill land. But I try not to comment on anything I haven't done. So I've never built there, so I'll have to pass on that one.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, and how long from start to finish do these projects take you about?
It should be 5 to 6 months. Part of the reason I'm switching contractors is he's been dragging them out longer. The new guy I'm working with can get them done even faster. So we're starting 2 duplexes in July. We're shooting to have them started by end of July, and we want to have those done before the end of October.
Nice. That's awesome. Okay. Very good. Okay, so I'm just trying to think of, if you're scaling this as a business, what does that look like? Are you eventually going to have multiple contractors? And are you going to have a team that's, doing the communicating with the city? Or how does that look like if you wanted to go from, doing one build to having like 20 of them going on at a time? Or is that even possible?
Sure. So I have more just scaled the land flipping side of things.
Yeah.
However, with the new contractor, if things work out as I expect them to, he and I will be doing quite a few more builds because there's such a need for entry level housing. So potentially that will happen more into next year, but again, that's going to be totally dependent on how these two projects go. And to answer your question, it would be more, or no, it would be really entirely just dependent on him and his processes and systems, because he has the capacity to do quite a few more builds. What I know,
Oh,
what I'm good at is getting the land. And
I
so,
see.
yep,
That
yep.
makes sense. Yeah, because I mean, based on what you're telling me, it seems like a business that you could really systematize to where, if you get the processes in place, you can just start cranking it up if you have, the leads coming in.
Yeah, well, exactly. And so working on, out east, for example, I was out there with him last week, and he's got a bunch of just modulars going up on 9 lots out there. And it's so simple, especially once you get into modular homes. And there's such a need. So I've got quite a bit of marketing going out there to see if we can get other big pieces, split them up, and do, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 modulars all at once out there. Because yeah, you're absolutely right. It is very simple. And that's, again, to my point earlier, why I think the whole idea of new construction being considered risky, whereas something like flipping is considered more normal, is just ridiculous. I
Yeah.
mean, flipping, every house is different. Just the bullshit you run into, it's awful. In my opinion, that's a hard business. New construction is so much easier.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay. And then you also have a land flipping business. So tell me about that. Where did that come from? Were you introduced to that immediately? Did you pick that up somewhere along the way? Where did you get into? Is it wholesaling the land, or are you buying it and selling it, or what does that look
Sure. So, well, first and foremost, that's the base of everything. What the value that I provide in the construction process is not in the construction process, it's in the
like? Oh, right.
finding of the
Yeah.
land at a big discount. So, that's my business. Putting
Yeah.
homes or duplexes on a few lots at a time is just it's just one dispo strategy,
Got it. Yeah.
right? So, most of the land just buy and sell for cash. Occasionally, we'll sell it on terms, but I don't really do assignments. I mean, very occasionally, maybe, but I don't really do assignments.
And why is that? It seems a little bit simpler to me. It's just the timeline of selling it, or
It makes me really uncomfortable. I mean, in Colorado, I've had a couple lawyers just tell me it's blatantly illegal. There aren't really there's seemingly no rules in Florida, so lots of assignments are being done down there. So it depends from state to state. I know in Illinois they've made it basically illegal without a license. So some states it's much easier to be within the confines of the law. Some states the laws are different. So it just depends where you are. But I don't. I mean, I would want a license if I was going to do that at scale.
I see what you're saying. Okay. Do you think it's maybe different with land? How some people, like, if you were going to do a wholesaling business of houses in Colorado, would you feel the same way about that, or is it because it's land?
Again, I mean, my only opinion is that which I've been given from lawyers. And so in
Yeah. Okay.
Colorado, I had a buddy who built a business wholesaling houses out here. And a few years in, he spoke to a local attorney, and she just laughed. She's like, you can't just do 50 assignments. The idea is you had the intent to close and something changed. And like you would immediately be found guilty of operating or selling real estate without a license if you're ever sued. And so what he started doing is closing on like 50% of them and flipping them, like actual rehab flips. So again, that's just a couple lawyers' opinions who I've spoken to. I had one speak at my real estate group who just told me, he's like, no, even with intent, this is just illegal. So I don't know. I'm not a lawyer, but that makes me uncomfortable.
Interesting.
So that's Colorado though. So
Yeah, Colorado. Because I mean, there's a million gurus online and stuff, but the
yeah,
wholesaling.
and to be
Yeah.
clear, I've done a couple dozen assignments just when it was somebody I knew or like a really reliable end user where it's, hey, I'm not worried about it. But gosh, that would make me uncomfortable to make a business out of that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've heard it's like an $11 billion industry, like just
I'm
assignments.
sure it is. And to be clear, none of what I'm saying has anything to do with ethics. It's entirely just the law is what it is. And this
Yeah.
is what I've been told. It's totally needed. Like realtors are not serving that niche. We need a market for or a way to help homeowners with distressed real estate. Like that's a very needed and important function in the market. It's just the mechanics of it become hairy depending on the law where you are.
And there are bad actors, there's people that take advantage of people and
Sure.
don't do good practice and all that. So there's probably need for some sort of oversight. It's kind of a little bit of the Wild West still with wholesaling, but
Yeah, I mean, if you work with enough realtors, you realize there's probably more. The amount of deals we have gotten because of incompetent realtors is painful. It is. I mean, if you have a brain, you can get your real estate license in a couple of weeks. It's so bad. And that's why the ones that are competent dominate, because there are so many that just don't know anything about real estate and are not fiduciaries. So, you know, the regulated side of the business isn't much better.
Yeah, fair enough. Um, One of the things I heard you talk about on Joe McCall's show was the amount of opportunity there is just based on how many people are getting into investing in land. Your marketing dollars are going far further. People aren't getting marketed to quite as much. Do you think I think that interview you did was like 6 months ago. Do you think that's still the case?
Mm-hmm.
How do you see the next 6 months to, even a few years with flipping land? Do you think it's going to get more competitive? How do you view that?
Yeah, it already has gotten more competitive. Absolutely. Right. Housing got a little more challenging. There's not a lot of inventory. So there's definitely been a flock of people from housing into land. But nonetheless, it's still not a well understood asset. There's really nobody teaching it well, in my opinion. And, a lot of the competition just gives us more opportunity to negotiate and show competency with the sellers because, again, I learned about it from the context of actually building homes. And so much of the competition that comes into the market doesn't have a clue about plat maps and perk tests and all the different lingo and nuance that goes into building houses or apartments or anything on a piece of land. And so teaching my acquisition guys that has definitely helped set us apart. And then along that whole train of thought, actually having money and closing on lots has been great. I mean, right on my our mail pieces, it says tired of fake offers, we send proof of funds. So honestly, I mean, if you're out there trying to assign land contracts, we're going to take deals from you because my guys will say, oh, you got another offer. Did they send you proof of funds? Because we will. I bet they'll waste your time. So knowing the land sellers and knowing their pain points and what they're frustrated with has really gotten us a lot of deals. And one more thought along that whole conversation is people coming from housing. I'm sure you can speak to this where a lot of deals on housing is due to distress, right? They got to sell, something's wrong.
Mhm.
Having done several hundred land deals, I can tell you it is rarely distress because think about it. Land is often bought with cash or almost always bought with cash, and especially 10 or 20 years ago. And we're buying from people who bought it a long time ago. And
Yeah.
so they bought it for cash a couple decades ago. They tend to be in a strong financial position now. And so it's more they want legitimacy and ease. And so I took the word cash out of our mailers. I mean, how else would you buy land? I'm not sure. But anyways, that knowing our avatar has really, really helped us. So we have really solid, well built out, standardized templates, emails, FAQ sheets. Here's all of our information. Here's the title company. Here's how the process works. And just building legitimacy right off the bat helps us get deals all of the time.
Wow, that's awesome. Okay, so what about the disposition strategy of seller financing it? Because that's more common with land not being bank financeable. Do you see that as a way to create passive income, or can you do that with infill lots even, or is that normal?
Oh, totally. Some of my friends have done it. I'm sure Brent Bauer. Most of what he sells is on terms, but it's just a different business.
Mm-hmm.
So actually, you made one point I want to comment there. Good. Noticing the infill side of things, it is more often that your buyer for infill is going to be a builder who intends to build soon. So it is a little bit harder to build up a portfolio and notes on infill lots because a lot of times it's going to get paid off pretty quickly. So that is a good point you make there. Nonetheless, I've still sold a couple dozen on terms, and it's a nice little income stream, but I prefer to use the land business as a way to just scale my income and then move it into buy and holds. But that's just my strategy. It's not right or wrong. If you want to sell on terms and have a big portfolio and notes paying you every month, you would probably want to go more towards recreational land or more rural land, maybe actual raw land. infill in places where it's actually getting built out is a little harder to do that with.
Sure, that makes sense. Okay, so how do you go about targeting infill lots? Are you going to a county or a state or a city or a subdivision and then just sending everybody there some mail? Like then everyone is going to know like this is, you know, this is the guy that's buying all the land here. Or
Mm-hmm.
do you get really niche down? Is it direct mail, cold call line? What is the marketing process? If you don't mind, obviously you don't got to
Yeah.
give away all the secret sauce, but I'm just curious how the marketing side of things work with land.
Yeah, no, I don't care. None of this is secret. It's so easy, man. It's just doing it consistently over the long term. So with what my niche, I've never understood the idea of mailing an entire county. Maybe maybe if you're doing rec land in really rural areas, you can find entire counties where it's fairly homogenous. But I mean, most of these counties I have, if I were to mail the whole thing, I would mail, you know, infill of every type, from residential to industrial to commercial, plus some raw land, plus some rec. Like that doesn't make any sense to me. So no, we more niche down by subdivision. And so PropStream has the visual tool for pulling data, and that's really useful. Um, gosh, I lost my train of thought a little bit there, but 10 years owned, out of state, out of county tends to be the lowest hanging fruit. So that's where we start as far as the data I pull on PropStream, because who is that? That's somebody who bought it a long time ago. They probably intended to move there and build a home, but for whatever reason, life got in the way. They didn't move. So that tends to be a good representation of our avatar when I pull that sort of list. And then from there, it's mostly direct mail, but we do some cold calling as well.
Which company do you use for your direct mail?
Pebble, the CRM, actually mails for you.
Oh, wow. That's pretty cool.
Yep.
What is the cost per lead compared? And you don't got to give me like certain numbers, but just in general, like how much further is your marketing dollars going, and the velocity of that marketing dollars to seeing money returned with land? I guess if you don't necessarily wholesale houses, but is it a substantially higher response rate?
I believe so. I've never really mailed for housing, so I can't speak to that well, but I can tell you I get somewhere between 0.5% and 1% response rate. And then, trying to get true averages is kind of impossible the way I'm doing it, because I'm sending about 10,000 mailers a month to 8 to 10, maybe a dozen different markets. And so I'm not getting a big enough sample size for each market to really give you a good average. Thinking about the law of large numbers, regression to the mean, you need a big sample size to get a true representative average. And that's hard to do when a lot of these markets, if I go, 10 years owned, out of state, out of county, there's only 1,000 results. I'm going to look back. I'm working on aggregating numbers 6 months in arrears, because as a corollary to that whole point, it's a longer sales cycle oftentimes than you want it to be. So we got one of the best deals we've ever gotten this month, and my acquisition guy had been working on that since last November. It looks like I think we got 2 more small deals yesterday. One of them, we initially got the lead last September. One of them we got over a year ago. And so sometimes we send mailers and we get deals 3 weeks later, 4 weeks later. That'll totally happen. But then there's a portion of these deals. We have this big long-term follow-up column in our CRM. And my guys go through that once or twice every month. And what do you know? We pull deals from it all the time. And so I wouldn't say rarely, because it is very feasible to, again, send mail and right when it hits, get deals off of it. But if that's all you're getting, you are losing a lot or leaving a ton of money on the table, because follow-up is everything. Most of our best deals we've gotten 3, 6, 9 months down the road with tons of follow-up. And so, there was another one this year that stands out in my mind where we got the lead last fall sometime and came to an agreement on price. He disappears. But we've done this for years. So in my SOP follow-up sheet, it says if they expressed interest and then disappear, you follow up until we get the deal. And so it was in the long-term follow-up column. My guy would call him, once every few weeks, then shoot another email in another 3 weeks, and then a text. And eventually, out of nowhere, one day he emails back and he goes, "Oh, sorry, I got busy. Yeah, I'd still sell." We agreed on price, bought it at 21.5. The day it was listed on market, it went under contract at 60. And that was what, maybe 6 months after we'd actually gotten the lead. So follow-up is everything. And this is true in any business. You know, I got a lead last week from a mailer sent 2 years ago. And that's not most of them, but it happens. It happens. So
That's impressive. Okay, so say a deal comes in, you lock it up, you close on it. About how long does it take to sell that deal?
man, it is all over the board. There are some where there's some types of land where we can get it sold in a couple days every time. There's some types of land it might take 6 to 9 months to sell.
Interesting. Okay.
So again, a little bit all over the board.
Yeah. And I did have one question with PropStream or like one of those softwares. If you pull a list, sometimes it'll show that land is like new builds. How do you filter those out? Is that an option on PropStream or Batch Leads?
Well, so PropStream is just taking public data and trying to apply, their set categories to it. So it's not always perfect. There's some markets where it'll say there's no results when in fact there's tons of vacant land. So unfortunately, I don't have a solution for you there. You're going to have to find someone that's good with data.
Oh yeah, and just filtering them all out. Okay. How are you picking markets? Because you mentioned you're in a bunch of different markets. Mm-hmm. Are they generally hotter for land, or what's the rhyme or reason for what determines what market you're in?
This is always evolving because unfortunately, as much as I'd love it to be purely quantitative, there's a big qualitative aspect to it. And so I'll use an example, right? There's one in North Carolina I'm in where I just saw I was scrolling around Zillow on the map, looking at solds in the last 30 days. I saw a big cluster of land sales, and it was a place I'd never heard of. And I have dozens of friends in land. And so a lot of times when I find hot markets, I'm like, oh, well, 10 of my friends are doing business here. But this one I'd never heard anyone talk about. So I thought that's interesting. So started looking at, how many lots sold in a given 30 or 90 days versus how many came on market, and far, far more sold than come on market. So there's tons of demand. And then I look at new builds. Oh, there's tons of new builds going up in an affordable price range. Plus, we're in a part of the country where I know people are flocking to. And then there's, again, the more qualitative side where always start calling some locals. And so I called a few realtors there and I asked them about a lot. And they go, oh, no, you can't buy that. That's not on the market. And I got that sentiment from a couple realtors, and they clearly didn't know anything about real estate. And then I started just researching the community a little bit, and it had a really bad connotation for years. And this is interesting now. I've seen this a bunch of times where you find these places that historically have been rough areas, but they're right outside of one of the metros that's grown like crazy in recent years, and they're still really cheap. And I have had great success in places like that, where it's like the right timing. You have this subdivision that's been ignored. It's thought of as all kinds of bad. Well, let me give you an example. Pahrump, Nevada was a great one. It's very competitive there. It's slowed down, but that was known as where you go for the brothels. It has brothel in the zoning code. Pueblo West, Colorado. Coloradans wouldn't go near it. It had a terrible connotation. It has been one of the most profitable places for me to make money ever in the last 4 years. Lehigh Acres. Locals talked about it as just drugs and meth and rural garbage. It's blown up over the last few years. Brunswick County is the place in North Carolina I'm referring to. One of the poorest places in the country. Now it's been growing like crazy. So those are just 4 examples of places that had horrible connotations that have been very profitable for land because they reached kind of a critical mass where, again, it got so expensive near it. It was growing like crazy near it that eventually people said, screw it, and moved in, and it started gentrifying. So all that to say is I don't have a clear formula for you on how to pick markets. It's a matter of I want to be where people are moving. I generally want to be in a second or third level market outside of one of the major metros. I want there to be a lot of infill land available. I want there to be new construction going up. And then just talking to locals, I want, if there's tons of super competent people there, if every realtor you talk to knows what land flipping is, knows what assignments are, knows what you're doing, has 4 other clients he's selling for, just like you, that's going to be a competitive market. I prefer that to not be the case.
Yeah, so it's like you're trying to find the best of both worlds. It's like the prices are increasing, but it's still not competitive because it's just perception that it's not, the viable
Mm-hmm.
place. That's
Yep.
really
Which
okay.
is easier said than done. So,
Right. It's
yeah.
almost like you kind of have to have the inside scoop on, like what the people in the main city are saying, or like where you
Mhm.
have a feel for it that isn't necessarily like on Google search.
Sure. Yep.
That's interesting. Okay, so how many deals about a month are you averaging with the flipping side of things, the land flipping?
It's all over the board, man. We have slower and faster deals, or months, excuse me, but we'll probably do somewhere between 70 and 80 deals this year.
70. Wow, holy smokes. That's a that's a pretty good business you got going there. And what's
Yep.
the average profit size on each flip?
Well, again, though, averages are misleading. I mean,
Sure.
we have one this month where we're making 80 grand, but a lot of them we make 10 grand. Some of them, I had one that wasn't great this month. We made $4,600. So
Yeah.
again, it's kind
Yeah,
of all
no,
over the board, man. Yeah.
I hear you. But I mean, I guess if you're doing that many deals, it's just a matter that you keep them going.
Mm-hmm.
Um, okay, that's awesome. Let's see, where was I going to go from there? Oh yeah, the next thing. Okay, so how do you see this? Do you want to be like the one that's steering this for the next X amount of years, or do you see yourself eventually like packaging this business up and having it run on its own? Do you want to be in the day-to-day stuff the whole time, or what does that look
No,
like?
no, definitely not. I'm working on having my guys to the point where the small stuff they do on their own, they put stuff under contract without me at this point. So just working on getting them better and better trained and more competent so they don't need me. And then focusing on the bigger stuff that is higher barrier to entry, right? So more expensive markets just in the land flipping, but then also, I think the best iteration of this business has multiple divisions. It has simple land flips, but then it also has a division that goes after bigger acreage to subdivide it and sell it off, and then of course the new construction division. And so, working on the way that I'm working towards that is kind of like I said, is finding a new contractor here, and assuming all goes well, we're going to be doing a much larger project or just number of projects together. But then also we've been pushing towards more expensive markets, higher barrier to entry where newbies can't get in.
Mm-hmm. Would you say like the highest level you could go would be like huge multifamily developments, or is that just the highest level maybe of a different sector in land flipping? Like, could you do the same level of something with just developing houses?
Sure, sure. You could go that route, and that's a high level iteration of it. But
Sure.
another big niche is think of the big builders. D.R. Horton, Toll Brothers. People like that. I said Toll Brothers, Richmond. Um, they have large developers, and the word, just as a quick aside, developer does not necessarily mean anything about building. If you
Mm,
take raw land and you turn it into a subdivision and sell it to a builder, you are a develop. That's what a developer does. So that word is
mm,
often misused. Anyways,
yeah.
there are all kinds of large scale developers that they partner with the big builders, and the big builder says, "Hey, I need a subdivision of 100 lots, 500 lots, whatever, where every lot has utilities to it, a graded pad site." And they do that. And that's a huge business in and of itself. So that's a whole nother
Yeah.
iteration of the business that could be done eventually. That, at least where I'm at now, makes me nervous because it takes years. I'm watching a friend of mine do this at a large scale in Pueblo, and just the exposure to market change, you have to be extremely well capitalized and very cautious as to how you structure the debt because, he's 5 or 6 years into the project I've been watching him do, and he's still
Wow.
not done. And just how much the market can change, again, how you're capitalized and what your solution is if, the short-term loan comes due and you can't sell at that time. You need plans B and C. So that's something that can be done, but again, it's a little bit intimidating.
Yeah. Does it seems like with those huge projects, you're getting money from like a big institutional bank at that point, right? Because if you're dealing with like $50 million or something crazy, right?
A lot of times, yeah, a lot of times, and that can be, yeah, that would be the way to go in my opinion. But the one I'm thinking of specifically, I don't think he was far off from that number as far as the total project and amount of cash involved. And I know he does. It's just, some high level investors he knows, and that just seeing the stress and the pain in the butt where one lazy city employee or one city employee who doesn't like you can slow the process down so much, and there's so much at risk as far as just monthly debt service and then total capital invested. So that can be intimidating, having watched a friend of mine go through that at a high level.
Wow. Okay. All right. For the person that's like looking at this, kind of like myself, who's interested in getting started, and I almost don't like even asking like getting started because people always just don't do anything because they think that's some first step. But if you were to go back in time, based on what you know now, how would you go about building a business from day one? Would you do things differently? Would you do it the same way? What would that process look like?
Sure. So I was a little short-sighted with spending money on marketing, and I would have spent more on marketing up front because when I look back at how few mailers I had to send to get deals, oh, I was spoiled and I didn't know it, And so
Yeah.
I right off the bat, make sure you know the difference between spending money and investing money. Okay. And then pick one very specific niche and learn that niche. And then another thing, I paid someone to learn what I needed was the systems, right? So I learned land and development from my older friend I told you about, who I started working with. But he was older, he wasn't good on the systems to use because he wasn't up to speed on current technology. And it was also like drinking from a fire hose. He's showing me apartments he built and storage units and houses and luxury house. And so it's just a ton to learn. And so I worked with him for a while. I, assigned land to him for builds. I started doing some builds with him. So I was kind of fractured and all over the place. And I said, I just need the simple system from all the SOPs to all the systems to use. So I actually paid for that. I paid just for a course, and that was very useful. I should have done that sooner because then I had just a turnkey model to execute. Make sure you screen the person, make sure you're reputable, but it's a really simple business. So if it is a reputable person that knows the business, that's worthwhile in my opinion. It worked very well for me. It helped just give me the confidence from not wasting time on figuring out the CRM and where to pull the data and where to all that, right? And
Yeah.
then from there, just take the perspective of this is a long-term business I'm going to build, and I need to pursue it for months and months and years, really, because so many people, they hear some person on a podcast who's successful say, well, I get a deal in Florida for land with 1,200 mailers. So just arbitrarily, I'm just throwing out an arbitrary number. And then they go and they send 1,200 mailers and they don't get anything. And back to my point about regression to the mean, they don't understand that's maybe what they'll get on average if they send 50,000 mailers over the course of a year, right? You don't necessarily get that average on a small sample. And so be prepared to send mail or cold call or whatever your marketing strategy is consistently over the long term and follow up religiously with your leads. Because again, what did I just tell you? We got one of our best deals ever this month from 9 months of follow up. So to summarize everything I just said, make sure you have the money to invest in the marketing and you're not afraid to do so. Make sure you're ready to pursue this for years and be relentless on your follow-up. And then find someone who's where you want to be, and whether it's paying them or working from them, I would learn from someone who knows the business.
Yeah, that's great advice. Thanks.
Sure.
Aside from, I think I agree with you. The best way to get the most clear and concise information to streamline things is, go pay for somebody else's knowledge. That's always the best way. What are some of the resources that you can, for example, you talked about how it really helped to learn the basics of just building a house from ground up and all those different processes. Where is a resource of knowledge where you can just go and study and, educate yourself even before starting on the process?
Yeah, that's a little bit harder for land. I would say do what I did. See if you can find someone locally. As far as if you really want to understand construction and just the land, especially if you're planning to do business in your locality, there's so many nuances from market to market where an easy example would be, I remember right when I was starting, I got a lot at 1.7 acres in an area where it's mostly 1 acre, and I'd bought and sold a number of the 1 acres. And I thought, oh, great, this is going to be worth more because it's almost double the size. It might have been like 1.8. My realtor goes, nah, people don't really care. It'll be about the same. Whereas in a bunch of the Florida markets I'm in, if you double the size, you double the price. And so another easy example, in the Colorado market where I build, you do a soils test to determine what sort of septic tank you need. Can you just get a conventional, or do you need some sort of engineered system? And sometimes they're more expensive and significantly more expensive, but you can always do it. Whereas for all intents and purposes, in some of the North Carolina markets I'm in, it's more of a dichotomy. It's a yes or no, because the solution to a failed site evaluation is so expensive that the cost of housing there doesn't support it. And again, for all intents and purposes, it's just a worthless lot. Mm-hmm. So again, if you don't know that and you're coming from the place where it's more of a spectrum of cost as opposed to a dichotomy, you can get in trouble. Or if you don't know in Florida that, if you have turtles or certain types of turtles or birds on your lot, you can be in a lot of trouble, right? There's all kinds of nuances of different markets. So yeah, finding someone in your locality is a great way to learn. Because you need to know what you're talking about.
Do you find there's a lot of developers or land investors that go to like ASREIA event? ASREIA is the one in Arizona, but REIA events or local investor groups. Have you found success with those groups, or is it?
That's where I met the guy I told you about. That's where I met Brent years ago. So I found people doing it there. Granted, a little bit of a bias because I'm out west. It is more common in the southern and western United States to have people in this space because it's not as built out. There's land everywhere. Whereas if you go to Boston or New York, right, there's no land left. So that's part of why I probably have a little more success finding people to do it just locally.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
But you're in Arizona, so I'm sure there's people down there doing it too.
Well, I'm probably going to be moving to Dallas here. Like I was saying, I'll be with Envoy Airlines. So.
Oh, yeah. There's lots of people in Dallas playing the land game for sure.
Really? You think that's a good market to build in?
So I have a high level understanding of this. I can't cite statistics, but I know that people are still moving there in droves. Companies are moving there with the money. The money is going there, right? And so I have plenty of friends doing business down there, or at least in the outskirts. I'm forgetting, I can't picture the map, but because there's kind of like a circle of the San Antonio, Austin, Dallas, a lot of the major highways along those, you can find places popping up, subdivisions, new areas with lots of new construction between the metros that have gotten expensive.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Kind of aside from the real estate, but also somewhat related, what do you like to do for fun? Like, is the wealth from real estate, do you use that to live like a certain lifestyle where you do these certain things, or you just love doing the real estate and that allows you to do more of it? Or is it a combination? What does your lifestyle look like?
Sure. So I love living out west. People take care of themselves here. I go mountain biking almost every day. I love to snowboard, try and ride 30 or 40 days a year, usually do a few trips. This year went out all over Utah, Telluride, all over Colorado, snowboarding. It was one of the best years ever. I've been going out to the ocean 3, 4, 5 times a year, trying to get better at surfing. So I love extreme sports. I do a lot of hikes and climbs and that sort of thing too. So yes, business is certainly not at the top of my priority list.
That's awesome. Okay. Yeah, there's kind of two schools of thought. Some people, all they do is the business, and that's maybe what they think of life as a game, and then they want to build that up. But I think bigger picture, I kind of lean more towards what you're saying. It's, go use it to have experiences.
Yeah, and I think it's useful too, because getting out of your day-to-day context give you time to think. And like I go mountain biking most every day, and a lot of times I go with friends that are also in real estate, and we'll be chatting about business and riding up the mountain. And it's just, I don't know, I find that really useful for coming up with solutions to problems and just thinking through things where I'm not sitting in my office. Because I also have friends that just work themselves to death, and in my mind, that's just not worth it. And I fully believe you can still build whatever it is you want to build without working 24/7.
Yeah, I agree. Well, all righty. I think that's a good note to kind of wrap things up. Well said. Really appreciate you coming on the show. You didn't hold back any piece of knowledge. It was all high value. So I appreciate you packing this episode full of all the good nuggets in there.
Sure.
I certainly learned a lot. How can people find you? Do you got social media? Do you have a website? Anything you want to plug?
Yeah, danhabercost.com, or find me on Facebook or Instagram.
Awesome. Well, all right, Dan, thanks for coming on the show. And I look forward to letting the world see the opportunities there are in land. And yeah, thanks again.
Thanks, Brendan.
All right, get well, everybody.